She was scrubbing blood off the kitchen floor at 4 a.m. Not her blood, when the man who would change her life forever almost drove past her without looking. She had nothing, no name that anyone respected, no shoes that weren't cracked at the sole, and a baby on her back that wasn't even hers, a baby her stepmother had handed her like a burden and said, "If it cries tonight, it's your fault." He had everything: a private jet, a father worth billions, a 5-month deadline to find a wife or lose it all. Neither of them was looking for the other, but God, it seems, had already written the rest. Stay with me, because what happens next will make you question everything you think you know about love, dignity, and what it means to truly deserve something. Her name was Zara, and if you had passed her on the street, you would not have looked twice. 22 years old, thin in the way that hunger makes you thin, hair always tied back in a worn cloth because her stepmother said loose hair was the mark of a woman who wants attention. Zara had learned very early that wanting anything for herself was a dangerous thing. Her parents had died when she was 8, of fire, the kind that takes everything in the night and leaves you standing outside in your nightgown with smoke in your lungs and nothing else. Her father's younger brother, Uncle Kofi, had tried to take her in, but his wife, a woman named Celestine, had looked at Zara the way you look at a stray animal you are not sure you want inside your house. Celestine took her in, but she never let Zara forget the terms. Zara cooked, Zara cleaned, Zara woke before sunrise and slept after midnight. She washed Celestine's clothes by hand, even after they bought a washing machine, because Celestine said machines didn't scrub out the real dirt. She ironed school uniforms for Priscilla and Gifty, who were only 2 and 4 years younger than Zara, but who had never, not once, been asked to iron anything themselves. Priscilla, the older one, was not entirely cruel. Sometimes she would leave a piece of bread on the corner of the kitchen counter and pretend she had forgotten it, so that Zara could eat it without anyone having to admit an act of kindness had taken place in that house. Gifty was her mother's daughter. She watched Zara like a warden. But none of that was the worst part. The worst part was the baby. 8 months before our story begins, Celestine's sister had arrived from the village with a newborn boy named Emmanuel. She was sick, too sick to keep the baby. She handed him to Celestine and was gone within the week, taken to a hospital in the capital, where she would spend the next year fighting for her life. Celestine did not want a baby. She had her own life, her own schedule, her beauty appointments and church meetings and WhatsApp group chats that required her full attention. So she handed Emmanuel to Zara. "You will take care of him," she said. "That is your purpose in this house." And so Zara, who had never been allowed to dream of her own children, found herself raising someone else's. She did not resent Emmanuel. That was the miracle of Zara. She did not become hard. She could have. She had every reason to. But when she picked up that baby in the dark of the night, when he cried and she pressed her lips to his forehead and whispered that he was not alone, something in her heart that had been slowly dying came back to life. She loved Emmanuel the way only people who have lost everything can love. Absolutely, without condition, with their whole terrified heart. And Celestine knew it and used it. "If you ever try to leave this house," Celestine told her one evening, her voice perfectly calm, "I will take that baby to an orphanage the same day, and I will tell them you abandoned him." Zara stayed. His name was Kolade Adeyemi Osei, but everyone called him Kola. Kola was 29 years old, the only son of Chief Emmanuel Adeyemi Osei, a man who had built his empire from a single hardware stall in the Central Market 40 years ago into a conglomerate that touched shipping, real estate, manufacturing, and agriculture across 6 countries. The kind of wealth that had its own legal team, its own security detail, and its own particular gravity that pulled people toward it, whether they wanted to be pulled or not. Kola had grown up inside that gravity. He had watched it bend people, watched it make his father's friends smile too wide, and his own classmates at the international school treat him like a prize to be won. He had gone to university in London, then to a business school in Singapore, then back to the continent because his father had asked him to come back, and because, despite everything, Kola could not refuse his father. But the conversation he had with his father that afternoon he landed was not the conversation he had expected. Chief Adeyemi Osei was 71 years old, recently diagnosed with a heart condition that his doctors were managing but could not fix. He had called a meeting of the family board and had made a single announcement. He was retiring within 5 months, and the board's agreement for succession required that the heir be married. It was an old provision, written into the company charter decades ago by his own father, who believed that an unmarried man was an unstable foundation for a dynasty. "I cannot change the charter without triggering a full board vote," his father told him, "and I do not have the energy to fight that battle. You have 5 months. Find a wife you can respect. Bring her to the board dinner. That is all I ask." Kola sat in that office for a long time after his father left. He was not a man without options. He knew that. There were women, many of them beautiful, many of them educated, many of them from exactly the right families, who had been positioned near him for exactly this kind of moment. His mother's friends had been sending photographs for years. His own friends had joked about it. "Kola, when your father finally forces your hand, just call me. My cousin is exactly your type." The problem was not finding someone. The problem was that Kola had spent his entire adult life watching wealth make people performers. Everyone around him was always performing loyalty, performing love, performing respect, and he was tired of not knowing what was real. He got in his car and drove, not toward anything, just away. It was 6:47 in the morning. Kola had driven for almost 2 hours. The city was just beginning to wake, the street vendors pulling tarps off their tables, the first buses groaning down the main roads, the smell of charcoal smoke and frying plantains beginning to mix with exhaust. He was coming down a side street near the Ajir Ganor junction when he saw her. She was standing at the edge of the road with a baby tied to her back and 2 heavy shopping bags in each hand. The bags were pulling her shoulders down, and her face was turned slightly away from the traffic. She was not looking for a taxi. She was not looking for anything. She was just standing there, the way people stand when they are so used to not being helped that they have stopped expecting it. Something made Kola slow down. Maybe it was the baby. Maybe it was the angle of her shoulders, that particular posture of someone holding themselves together through sheer will. Maybe it was something he could not explain and would not try to. He pulled over. He lowered his window. "Excuse me, can I help you with those bags?" Zara did not turn immediately. She had learned to be careful about men who stopped their cars. When she did turn, their eyes met, and Kola felt something he had not felt in a long time, the sensation that the person in front of him was not performing anything at all. She said, "I'm fine, thank you." She was clearly not fine. Her hands were shaking slightly from the weight. "At least let me drive you to wherever you're going. It's no trouble." She looked at him for a long moment, then she looked at the bags, then she looked at Emmanuel, who had just woken up and was beginning to fuss on her back. "The market on Nkrumah Street, that is all." She got in. He did not ask her many questions. He sensed she was not a person who answered questions easily, so he kept it simple. "Is that your baby?" A pause. "No, he belongs to my family. I look after him." "How old is he?" 8 months. Kola glanced in the rearview mirror.
Emmanuel had stopped fussing and was now staring at the back of Kola's headrest with the intense philosophical focus that 8-month-olds give to everything. "He's calm," Kola said. "He knows when someone means no harm," Zara said quietly. Something about that sentence made Kola's chest tighten. They rode in silence for another minute. Then Kola said, almost without meaning to, "What do you want? Not for the baby, for yourself." Zara turned and looked at him as if he had said something in a language she hadn't heard in years. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what do you want your life to look like, if you could choose?" Another long pause. Emmanuel made a small sound. "I want to go back to school," she said finally. Her voice was so careful, as if she was testing whether the words were safe to say out loud. "I want to study, to become someone who helps people. A nurse, maybe, or a doctor. I don't know yet, but something that means something." Kola said nothing for a moment. Then, "What's stopping you?" And something in Zara's face shut down, not in anger, in the way that doors close when the wind gets too cold. "Many things," she said. They reached the market. She thanked him without looking at him and got out with her bags and her baby and disappeared into the crowd. Kola sat at the side of the road for 4 full minutes before he drove away.
She should not have told Celestine about the man in the car, but Gifty had seen. Gifty had been watching from the upstairs window. She always watched from the upstairs window. And before Zara could put the bags down in the kitchen, Gifty was at her mother's side, whispering. Celestine came into the kitchen with her arms folded. "A man drove you home from the market this morning." "I drove with him to the market," Zara said carefully. "Not home. I walked home from the market." "Who is he?" "I don't know. A stranger. He offered to help with the bags." Celestine looked at her for a long time. Then she looked at Emmanuel, who was in his carry chair on the kitchen floor, gnawing on a plastic ring. "If I ever find out you are using this house as your base for chasing men," she said softly, "Emmanuel goes to the state care facility today. No warning." Zara's jaw tightened. She said nothing. After Celestine left, Zara stood at the kitchen sink and gripped the edge of it with both hands and breathed until her heart stopped hammering. She told herself, "Do not think about the man in the car. Do not think about what he asked. Do not think about what you said. It does not matter. Nothing like that is for you." She believed it. She had to. 3 days later, he was there again. Not parked, not looking for her. He was at the pharmacy 2 streets from Celestine's house, picking up medication for his father's visiting physician, when he saw her through the window. Zara, standing at the pharmacy counter, counting coins with the careful concentration of someone who has counted coins her whole life. Emmanuel on her back, her lips moving slightly as she tallied. She was 4 coins short of the baby's vitamins. The pharmacist was patient but firm. Zara put 2 of the coins back on the counter and looked at what was left. She looked at the vitamins. She looked at Emmanuel. "Can I have just half a package, half of what is normally sold?" "That is not how we sell it," the pharmacist said. Kola walked up to the counter. He placed a note on top of Zara's coins without looking at her. "For the vitamins," he said. Zara turned. When she saw who it was, something crossed her face. Not gratitude, not relief, but a complicated mixture that Kola would spend weeks trying to decode. It looked almost like wariness, like someone who has learned that kindness always has a price. "I can pay for my own things," she said. "I know, but it's faster this way, and the baby needs them now. You can pay me back in goodwill." A beat. She let him pay. Outside, she stopped. "Why do you keep appearing?" "I live in this city," he said. "I'm not following you if that's what you're asking." She studied him. "You asked me what I wanted. Nobody asks that." "Maybe nobody has. Doesn't mean nobody should." Emmanuel grabbed a fistful of Zara's collar cloth and pulled, the way babies do, announcing his presence without apology.
Zara reached back automatically and adjusted him without breaking eye contact with Kola. "Thank you for the vitamins," she said, and this time she meant it. "What is your name?" he asked. "Zara. Kola, that's my name, in case you want to know who to blame for the vitamins." For the first time, something shifted in her face. Not quite a smile, but the shadow of one, the memory of a smile. She walked away. Kola stood on the pavement and felt, for the first time in years, like something real had just happened to him. She found the pharmacy receipt. It fell out of Zara's apron pocket when Zara was pulling it off in the laundry room, and Gifty, who had been waiting, always waiting, picked it up before it hit the ground. The receipt, the pharmacy name, the date, the amount, and at the bottom, in the pharmacist's handwriting, where gift purchases were noted, paid by K.A. Gifty took it to her mother. Celestine read it twice. Then she smiled, and that smile was the most dangerous thing Zara had ever faced. That evening, Celestine dressed carefully. She put on her best wrapper, the one with the gold threading. She told Gifty and Priscilla she was going to see an old friend. She took the receipt. She had asked around, K.A. She knew who the Adeyemi Oseys were. Everyone in this city knew who they were. The Celestines of this world always know how to find a door when they smell money on the other side of it. Celestine arrived at the Adeyemi Osei Holdings main office building on a Thursday morning, presenting herself as a concerned guardian with important information regarding the company heir's recent activities. She did not get to Kola. His PA was too experienced for that. But Celestine was resourceful. She found a board member, an old associate of Chief Adeyemi Osei, named Mr. Darko, a man in his 60s who had always been more interested in the family's social liabilities than in its balance sheets, at his regular Thursday lunch spot. She sat down across from him without being invited. What she told him was a construction. It was built from true materials. Yes, Kola had stopped his car for Zara. Yes, he had paid for her at the pharmacy, but she built something else from those materials. She told Mr. Darko that Kola was involved with an uneducated housekeeper from a poor family, that the girl had a baby of unclear parentage, that she had made herself available to Kola in a way that was clearly calculated. The chief's son, Celestine said, deserves to know if someone is positioning themselves close to the family for financial gain. Mr. Darko listened carefully. He thanked her for her concern. He said nothing committal. But that evening, he made a phone call, and by Friday morning, Kola's father had heard a version of the story.
Chief Adeyemi Osei did not raise his voice. He never did. He sat at the head of the long dining table and spoke to his son the way he spoke in board meetings, with the careful precision of a man who has learned that controlled words do more damage than shouting. "I have been told you have been spending time with a domestic worker, a young woman who is living in someone's house as a servant, who has a baby." Kola was still. "Who told you that?" "It does not matter who told me. It matters entirely who told you, because whoever told you clearly had a version of events they wanted you to have." The chief looked at his son for a long moment. "Tell me your version, then." And Kola told him. All of it. The bags, the pharmacy, the way she had counted those coins, what she had said about wanting to be a nurse or a doctor. His father was quiet for a long time. "You are describing someone with admirable qualities," he said, finally. "But Kola, you have 5 months. I need the board to see a partner, someone who reflects what? The performance? Because I have watched people perform around this family my entire life, and I am tired of it." Another silence. "I'm not saying I'm going to marry her," Kola said. "I've spoken to her twice. I'm saying that whoever brought you this story had their own reasons, and I think you deserve to know what those reasons are." Zara knew none of it. She was focused, as she always was, on surviving the next hour.
That week, Emmanuel had developed a slight fever. Nothing serious, the clinic said, a minor infection, antibiotics recommended. But Celestine looked at the clinic bill and told Zara that the money would come out of Zara's account, a fictional tally Celestine kept for what Zara owed for living in the house, and that Zara should think carefully about whether being careless with the baby's health was worth the debt. Zara sat on the edge of her narrow bed that night, Emmanuel asleep on the mattress beside her, his breathing still slightly rapid with the remnants of the fever, and she did the only thing she knew how to do in moments like these. She talked to her parents, not out loud, in her head. She told them about the week. She told her father about the man who had asked what she wanted and how that question had frightened her more than any of Celestine's threats because it had opened a door she could not afford to walk through. She told her mother about Emmanuel, about how much she loved him and how terrified that love made her. She told them, "I am still here. I have not given up, but I am so tired." And then Emmanuel, as if he could hear her, opened his eyes in the dark and looked at her. His small hand found her finger, and he held it. And Zara closed her eyes and breathed. She decided in that moment that she was going to find a way, not for herself, for him. She was going to get herself educated. She was going to become someone who could take care of him properly. She did not know how, but she was done waiting for permission to want things. Kola did what he was trained to do. He gathered information. He had a private security firm his company used for background checks on business partners. He asked them to look into the household at number 14 Mensa Crescent, Agirigano, Celestine Mensa's home. Not invasively, just who lives there, what is the arrangement, who is this woman called Zara? What they found took less than 48 hours. Zara Asante, 22 years old, orphaned at 8 in a house fire in the Volta region, taken in by her uncle's wife, Celestine Mensa, at age 9. No formal schooling beyond basic level. She had been pulled out after 3 years in the household because, according to school records, the fees had not been paid and she had not returned. Currently registered at Celestine's address, no income on record, no personal bank account, nothing. The baby, Emmanuel, registered to Celestine's sister. Hospital records showed an emergency admission 8 months ago, severe illness. Baby currently in the care of household staff. Kola read the report in his office with the city spreading out behind him through the floor-to-ceiling glass. He was quiet for a long time. Then he called his lawyer.
What Kola did not know was that Celestine was already moving. After her meeting with Mr. Darko, she had reconsidered her strategy. Ruining the connection between Kola and Zara was useful, but it was not the most useful thing. Celestine was a woman of angles. She always found the angle. The angle here was this. If the Adeyemi Osei heir was interested enough in a nobody from her household to stop his car and pay for her vitamins, then there was leverage in that interest. Celestine did not need to destroy Zara. She needed to own the situation. So she did something that required real nerve. She called Kola directly. She had gotten the number from Mr. Darko's assistant, a small social engineering job that had cost her nothing but a smile and a coffee. She called and introduced herself as Zara's guardian. She said she understood Kola was acquainted with her ward. She said she wanted to make sure the relationship was conducted properly. She said she would be open to a meeting to discuss the situation. Kola listened to all of this. Then he said, "Thank you for calling. I'll be in touch." He hung up and immediately called his lawyer back. How quickly can we establish legal guardianship interference in a case where a minor, now adult, has been held in de facto servitude? "Are we talking about someone specific?" his lawyer asked. "Yes," Kola said. "We are." It was a Tuesday. Kola had gone to a church fundraiser. Priscilla was at a friend's house. Gifty was upstairs on her phone. Zara was in the kitchen with Emmanuel.
He was in better health now, sitting in his carry chair, watching her make soup with the solemn attention of a food critic. The knock came at the back door. Zara opened it and found Kola. He was not alone. There was a woman with him, middle-aged, professional-looking, with a small bag and a calm, unhurried face. She introduced herself. "My name is Mrs. Osu. I am a social welfare officer and also a legal advocate. Mr. Adeyemi Ose asked me to accompany him because he wanted you to have someone independent present for this conversation." Zara looked at Kola for a long moment. "You had me investigated," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," he said. "I'm sorry. I wanted to understand your situation before I did anything. I didn't want to make it worse." She let them in. Mrs. Osu sat at the kitchen table and laid out what she knew, what had been found. The school records, Emmanuel's registration, the absence of any formal arrangement for Zara. Then she said, "Zara, what has been done to you has a name. It is called domestic servitude, and you have rights. Whether you choose to act on them or not is entirely your decision, but you should know they exist." The kitchen was very quiet. Emmanuel made a small sound and grabbed the edge of his carry tray. Zara looked at him for a long time. Then she looked at Kola. "If I leave this house, Celestine will send Emmanuel to the state facility. She has told me many times." Mrs. Osu opened her bag and set a document on the table. "We have already filed a temporary custody arrangement for Emmanuel through family court, citing the absence of the biological guardian. As of this morning, his placement cannot be changed without a court hearing. Celestine cannot move him." Zara stared at the document. Her hands, flat on the table, began to tremble. Not from fear, from something else entirely. She packed in 11 minutes. She knew what was hers and what wasn't. She had always known, because in that house the line had been drawn and redrawn so many times that Zara had memorized it. Her things fit in a single bag in a cardboard box, a few pieces of clothing, a small photograph of her parents taken years before the fire, Emmanuel's vitamins, his extra clothes, his favorite chewing ring, a small notebook she had been filling quietly for months, words she had taught herself, letters she had practiced in secret, the beginning of the education she had promised herself. She picked up Emmanuel and went to the front door. Gifty appeared at the top of the stairs. "Where are you going?" Zara looked up at her. She had spent years being careful around Gifty, careful and small and quiet. She looked at her now without any of that. "Forward," she said, and walked out. Celestine arrived home at 9:47 p.m. from her church fundraiser, still wearing her gold thread wrapper, in good spirits because she had been praised publicly for a donation she had made. A donation she could barely afford, made entirely for the social credit. She walked into a quiet house. She called Zara's name. Nothing. She went to the kitchen. No dinner. She went to Zara's room. Empty. She stood in the empty room for a full minute. Then she went upstairs and told Gifty to call Zara's phone. "Her number doesn't exist anymore. The number is not available." Celestine's first thought was not where Zara had gone, it was Emmanuel. She thought of Emmanuel, in the money, the child allowance she had been quietly collecting on his behalf, in the weight that baby represented in her household calculus. She called the state care facility herself to make the threat real, to start the paperwork. The care facility told her there was a legal hold on the child's placement. She would need to appear before a family court to contest it. Celestine sat in her kitchen in her good wrapper and began to understand that something had moved while she wasn't looking.
Kola's guest house was on the compound of his family property, a smaller building, separate from the main house, used occasionally by visiting staff and consultants. He offered it to Zara without conditions. She accepted it without gratitude, which Kola found oddly more reassuring than gratitude would have been. "You don't have to be polite about it," she told him on the first evening when he had shown her around the small but comfortable space. "I know this is not nothing that you are doing, but I cannot be in debt to someone I don't know.
So I am going to work, and I am going to pay for this properly, and I am going to be out of your way." "All right," Kola said. "And I want to find a way to enroll in school. Whatever the adult education program costs, I will pay it back." "All right." She looked at him with slight suspicion. "You agree too easily." "I'm agreeing because you know what you want and you're saying it clearly. That is not something I should argue with." A pause. "The baby stays with me," she added. "He is my responsibility, and I won't separate from him." "The baby stays," Kola said, obviously. Emmanuel, as if in approval, gurgled from his carry chair on the floor. Something shifted slightly in Sarah's face. Not a smile, still just the shadow of one, but the shadow was getting a little more solid. His world was not kind to Zara. Not openly. These were not people who said ugly things out loud. They had lawyers and public relations consultants and a refined understanding of plausible deniability, but they watched, and the watching had a texture that Zara, who had spent her whole life being watched by Gifty, recognized immediately. His mother's friends watched her at the family Sunday lunch that Kola brought her to, an event she had not wanted to attend, but Kola had said, "You will face them at some point. It's better with me beside you than without." They watched the way she held her fork, the way she asked quietly which dish was which before serving herself, the way she kept Emmanuel on her lap rather than handing him to the house steward. His mother, Mrs. Adayemi Osi, a graceful woman in her late 60s who wore her wealth like a second skin, greeted Zara with perfect courtesy and the kind of smile that contains a complete assessment. "Kola tells me you want to study," she said over the appetizer course. "Yes, nursing, or medicine if it's possible." "Medicine," his mother repeated, not unkindly, but with the precise weight of someone measuring a distance. "It will take a long time," Zara acknowledged, "but I am not afraid of long." A silence at the table. Then Kola's father, who had said nothing since they sat down, looked up from his plate. "What did you say?" Zara looked at him directly. "I said I am not afraid of long." The chief looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his fork and resumed eating. But his face had changed, almost imperceptibly, but Kola saw it. Something had opened. After lunch, his mother found Kola in the hallway. "She is not what I expected," his mother said. "What did you expect?" Her mother paused. "I'm not sure, but she looks at your father the way very few people do, without wanting anything from him." It came from inside the house. It always does. Kola's closest friend was a man named Roland, his former flatmate from London, his business school study partner, the best man at 3 other people's weddings, a man Kola had trusted completely for nearly a decade. Roland had his own investments. Roland had a particular investment that had recently gone badly, a real estate development deal that had collapsed under regulatory pressure, leaving him with significant exposure. Roland needed a bridge loan, a significant one, the kind that required either collateral he didn't have or a very powerful friend willing to co-sign. Roland asked Kola for help. Kola said he needed to review the documents first. While he was reviewing them, over the course of several days, Roland made a different move. He went to Mr. Darko. He told Mr. Darko that Kola was seriously involved with a woman with no background, no education, and a baby of uncertain origin, and that the relationship was progressing rapidly and was likely to end in marriage before the board deadline. He framed it as concern for the company. He said that certain stakeholders on the board were already privately expressing misgivings about Kola's judgment. He suggested, gently, carefully, with the practiced subtlety of someone who had rehearsed the phrasing, that if the board were to consider an alternative succession pathway, perhaps one that allowed for a trusted management team rather than a single heir, the transition might be smoother. What Roland was suggesting, in the careful language of boardroom positioning, was this: remove Kola, replace him with a management committee, a committee that Roland, with the right endorsements, could influence heavily.
The loan was nothing to do with it. The loan was the opening gambit. Kola found out on a Wednesday afternoon when his father called him in and laid a printed transcript on the table, a transcript of a conversation his father's security team had recorded in Mr. Darko's office. Roland's voice, Roland's words. He read it twice. He set it down. "I'm sorry," his father said. "Don't be," Kola said. He was very still. "This is useful." He went home and sat with Zara in the guesthouse kitchen when Emmanuel slept. He told her what had happened, not because she needed him to fix it, but because he had realized somewhere in the last few weeks that Zara was the only person in his life who he did not have to translate himself for. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet." "What do you want to do?" He looked at her. "I want to protect what matters and deal with the rest from a position of clarity instead of anger." Zara nodded slowly. "That is the right answer," she said. "I have wanted to destroy things from anger. It doesn't work. It only breaks you, too."
3 months had passed. Zara enrolled in an adult education and accelerated learning program, one that compressed secondary schooling into an intensive 18-month track for adult learners. She studied in the mornings while Emmanuel was with a licensed child care worker that Kola had arranged and paid for, a cost that Zara tracked in a small ledger she kept on her nightstand, fully intending to repay every cedis. She was not a natural academic, not because she was not intelligent, but because she was starting from a different baseline than everyone around her, and she knew it. And the gap was sometimes terrifying. There were evenings when she sat at the table with her textbooks and Emmanuel asleep behind her, and she could not make the numbers of the letters stay still in her head, and she would have to put her hands flat on the table and breathe. On those nights, Kola would sometimes sit down across from her, not to help, she had not asked for help, just to be present. He would read something of his own or answer emails. The company of another person who was also working was, she found, entirely different from the company of someone who was waiting for you. The day her first major examination results came back, the National Equivalent Qualification Exam, the first formal academic certification she had ever held, she opened the envelope standing in the guest house doorway with Emmanuel on her hip. She read the result 3 times. Then she sat down on the doorstep and cried. Kola came around the corner of the house and saw her. He crossed the yard quickly. She held up the paper before he could ask. He read it. He sat down on the step beside her. Neither of them said anything for a long time. Then Emmanuel, apparently deciding that the silence had gone on long enough, grabbed Kola's sleeve and pulled. And they both laughed. The deadline was in 3 weeks. Kola had not rushed Zara. He had not mentioned the deadline, not once, because the deadline was his problem to manage, not hers. But his father had called a meeting, the family and the 2 board members his father trusted, and Kola, and in that meeting his father had said plainly, 3 weeks. Kola drove home that evening and found Zara in the yard, sitting on a plastic chair in the late afternoon light, with Emmanuel on a mat before her, teaching him to clap. She would clap her hands, he would watch with enormous concentration, and then he would do something with his hands that was adjacent to clapping, but was entirely his interpretation of the concept. Kola sat down on the ground beside the mat. "I have a complication," he said. She looked at him. He told her about the deadline. All of it. The charter provision, his father's retirement, the board, the 5 months, now 3 weeks. He told her he had never told her because he had not wanted her to feel like a solution to someone else's problem. She was quiet for a moment. "And now you're telling me because I am not going to marry someone without telling them everything, even if telling them everything means they say no." "Do you want to marry me?" she asked, direct. Zara was always direct when it mattered. "Yes,
Not because of the deadline. The deadline is a reason to move faster, but it is not the reason. She looked at him for a very long time. Emmanuel clapped, his own version, and looked enormously proud of himself. I will not be a decoration. I will not stop studying. I will not become someone who exists in the background of your life. I am not asking you to. And I want Emmanuel to stay with us. Whatever happens with his family situation, I want him to have a stable home. I cannot marry someone who sees him as temporary. He has never been temporary to me, Kola said. Another long silence. Then Zara said, Ask me properly. Kola stood up. He had nothing, no ring, no speech prepared, no staging. He stood in the dusty yard in the late afternoon light with a baby on a mat between them, clapping incorrectly, and he said, Zara Asante, will you marry me? With full knowledge that I am a complicated man from a complicated family, that I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve the clarity with which you see the world, and that I am fully aware you are doing me the larger favor here. A beat. Yes, she said. But we tell your father together, and I tell him myself who I am, what I come from, what I intend to be. I will not be introduced as anything less than exactly what I am. Yes, he said. Then, yes, she said. They went the next morning. Kola had told his father they were coming, but not why. Chief Adeyemi met them in his study, a large room lined with the artifacts of 40 years of building something from nothing, photographs, certificates, a single piece of Adinkra fabric given to him by his own father on the day he opened his first shop. Zara stood in the middle of that room, in her best dress, which was simple, clean, and pressed with the kind of care that makes simple things look intentional. She spoke. She told him her name. She told him where she came from. She told him about the fire and about Celestine and about Emmanuel and about the notebook she had kept for years, the words she taught herself in secret, the dreams she had carried in the dark. She told him that she was not finished becoming who she intended to be. She told him she was enrolling in a pre-medical program and that it would take years, and that she understood if that was not the picture he had for his son's life. But I want you to know, she said, that I am marrying your son for what he has. I am marrying him because he is the only person who has ever asked me what I want without already having decided what my answer should be. The room was very quiet. Chief Adeyemi stood up from behind his desk. He was a large man, not tall, but with the presence of someone who had occupied difficult rooms for decades and had never once let the room win. He walked toward Zara and stopped in front of her. He looked at her face for a long moment. Then he said, My wife tells me you said you are not afraid of long. Yes, Zara said. Good, he said, because this family's history is long, and it needs people who are not afraid of it. He extended his hand. She shook it. Welcome, he said. Now, what do you need to apply to the pre-medical program?
The family court hearing for Emmanuel's custody was scheduled for the same week as Kola and Zara's engagement ceremony. Celestine arrived at the court in her gold thread wrapper. She had a prepared statement. She had a character reference from her church pastor. She had a photograph of Emmanuel in what she described as a loving home environment, a photograph she had staged the week before Zara left, holding Emmanuel in the living room and smiling at the camera. Zara's legal team presented the school records, the absence of enrollment fees paid, the employment records from 3 neighbors who gave testimony about the hours they had seen Zara working, Emmanuel's medical records, which showed a period of substandard nutrition in his first 4 months in the household, corrected after Zara took over his primary care. Then, Mrs. Owasu, the social welfare officer, presented her assessment report. When the judge finished reading the report, she looked up at Celestine over her reading glasses and asked a single question. In the years Zara Asante lived in your household,
Did she have access to personal income? Celestine said she had provided Zara with room and board as compensation. That was not my question, the judge said. The hearing took 4 hours. Celestine did not get custody of Emmanuel. Temporary legal guardianship was extended to Zara pending a permanent determination upon verification of the biological mother's condition, who, it emerged during the proceedings, had recovered substantially and was in contact with the family court, expressing a wish to be involved in Emmanuel's life going forward. As Celestine left the courthouse, Zara was on the steps with Emmanuel on her hip. Celestine stopped. She looked at Zara. Something passed across Celestine's face, not quite remorse, not quite apology, but something, a recognition, maybe. The specific discomfort of facing someone you have wronged who has declined to become the person you told them they were. Zara looked at her for a moment, then she said, "I hope you find something to be kind about, Auntie. It's not too late." She walked down the steps to where Kola was waiting with the car. Roland's board maneuver collapsed the way overbuilt structures collapse, all at once the key support gives. When Kola presented the transcript to his father's legal team and the 2 trusted board members, the response was decisive. Mr. Darko, confronted with what he had been used for, withdrew his informal support for any alternative succession pathway and issued a formal statement supporting Kola's appointment. Roland attempted to deny the transcript's accuracy. Kola's legal team provided corroborating evidence, 3 additional conversations recorded with full legal compliance in which Roland had discussed the strategy with 2 potential co-investors. Roland was removed from 2 joint ventures he shared with STEPMOTHER Holdings. His loan application was formally declined. His remaining investment portfolio, exposed and over-leveraged, found no new takers in the city's financial circles, where the stories spread the way stories spread in tight networks, quietly, completely, and with permanent effect. Kola did not celebrate any of this. He called Roland once, directly, before the formal proceedings concluded. "Why?" he asked. Roland was quiet for a long time. Then, "Because I needed the money. And I thought you would choose her over everything, and I thought I could step into the space that left." "I chose her," Kola said, "and there was no space, because choosing her made everything else clearer, not smaller." He hung up. It was not the wedding that any of Kola's mother's friends had imagined for him. There were flowers, yes. There was music, yes. There was food and family and the careful choreography of a celebration that had been planned by people who took celebration seriously. But the moment that people would talk about afterward was not any of that. It was this. When Zara walked down the aisle in a dress that was elegant in the way that things are elegant when they have been chosen for meaning rather than spectacle, she was carrying Emmanuel. He was 14 months old now, very pleased with himself, wearing a small outfit that matched Kola's. She carried him on her hip the whole way, one arm supporting him, the other holding her small bouquet, her head high. When she reached Kola, he reached out, not to take her hand, but to take Emmanuel from her, so she could hold the bouquet properly, so her hands would be free. Emmanuel looked at Kola with his serious philosophical face, and then, apparently satisfied, grabbed Kola's lapel and held on. The officiant paused. The guests laughed, softly, warmly. Zara's face, finally, completely, without the shadow of anything held back, broke into a smile that the people in the first 3 rows would describe as the most real thing they had ever seen in a wedding. 5 years after the wedding, Dr. Zara STEPMOTHER defended her medical thesis at the university she had enrolled in, part-time at first, then full-time as Emmanuel grew old enough to school. The thesis was on maternal and neonatal health outcomes in low-income urban communities. Chief STEPMOTHER was in the front row. He was 76 years old now and walked slower, but he was there. Emmanuel was 7, sitting next to his great adoptive grandfather, wearing a small tie that he had put on himself and straightened twice, wearing the solemnity of a child who knows something important is happening and wants to rise to it. Kola sat beside them. When Zara's man was called and she stepped forward to receive her degree, Kola stood up. He did not shout. He was not of nature a shouter, but he stood, and Emmanuel stood because Kola stood, and the chief stood because his body would allow it, and then the rest of the room stood because there are moments when standing is the only honest response. Zara stood at the podium with her degree in both hands and looked out at the room. She spoke without notes. She said, 8 years ago, I was counting coins on a pharmacy counter to buy vitamins for a baby that wasn't mine. I had no education. I had no name that anyone respected. I had no idea that anything different was possible for me. I want to say to anyone in this room who is also counting coins, who has been told by someone or by life itself that they are too small for the thing they want, that the distance between where I was and where I am standing is not magic. It is years of sitting at a table when I wanted to give up, and one person who sat across from me without asking me to be finished yet. It is also a very patient baby who grew into a very patient boy and who taught me that love given freely, without condition, is the bravest thing a person can do. Emmanuel, in the front row, buried his face in the chief's arm from what appeared to be a combination of recognition and embarrassment. The room laughed. The room applauded. And Zara held her degree against her chest the way she had once held Emmanuel in the dark, pressing something precious close to keep it safe.
Celestine attended the graduation. She had been invited by Zara. She had come. She sat in the back, and she was small in her seat in a way that had nothing to do with her size. Afterward, Zara found her by the tea station. "You came," Zara said. "You sent a ticket," Celestine said. There was something raw in her voice. "I know you were not the person who destroyed me," Zara said. "I know you were the person who, in the wrong way, for the wrong reasons, gave me the years that made me this hard. And I think you should know that I am grateful, not for what you did, but for the person it made me, despite you." Celestine opened her mouth, closed it. Her eyes filled. "I have 2 daughters," she said finally, "who have never worked a day in their lives, and I am afraid for them, because the world is not what I taught them to expect." Zara looked at her for a moment. "Send them to me," she said. "I will find them something to do that is useful. I will not be kind to them in the way that breaks people, but I will be honest. That's all I can offer." Celestine nodded. She could not speak. Zara touched her arm once, briefly, and went back to her family. This story is about what happens when you refuse to let the world's verdict of you become your verdict of yourself. Zara had nothing. No education, no protection, no money, no ally, only a quiet, fierce, unkillable belief that she was meant for more than this, and the patience to become it. Kola had everything, and found that it meant nothing until it was placed in the service of something real. And Emmanuel, who came into this story as a weight on a tired girl's back, grew up knowing that the woman who carried him, before she could even carry herself, taught him the most important thing he would ever learn, that kindness is not weakness, that love given in hard places is the strongest thing there is, and that if you are carrying someone through the dark and you keep going, eventually, you both come out into the light. Tell me in the comments, if you had been in Zara's position, after everything Celestine did, would you have invited her to the graduation? Would you have forgiven her? Or does forgiveness have a limit? And if you are someone right now who is counting coins, or sitting at a table at midnight trying to make the letters stay still, or carrying something that belongs to someone else because no one else will, this story is for you. Subscribe, like, and share this with someone who needs it.